Welcome back. We are now restored and refreshed and have some boxes so we can do our cleanup this weekend. And now we are going to move from housing to transportation as another, what do we call it, these categories? No. Components. Components. Okay, transportation, Patrick.
Yes. So Patrick Titterton, Joint Fiscal Office. This is probably the section that will take the longest to explain. Because it is a rather complicated calculation that we have. And there are some issues that have come up with the data source that we use. And further, there's going to be some coming changes with where that data source comes from.
Right.
And some changes that they're making in how they conduct the survey. And further, we also have another option that we'll look at that after talking to Dan, he suggested might be an alternative approach. But we'll also see at the end, there's going to be pros and cons to any of these approaches. As there is with almost everything in this report, all the decisions that we make.
Well, we're lucky in this discussion to have the former chair of the House Transportation Committee with us. That would be Richie West.
So the transportation budgets are, sort of to overly simplify it, are calculated using a two-step process. First, we look at vehicle miles traveled per year. So we'll talk about how that looks a little bit later, but that's just how many miles you're driving. Pretty simple, right? The second is that we take that vehicle miles traveled per that type of household and we multiply that by a mileage rate. And so even within that, that's sort of a two-part process where we're starting with the IRS mileage rate. It's like a reimbursement rate per mile. And that includes, well, we'll look at that. And then we have to adjust that because that's just a per mile. That doesn't account for the fact that the more you drive, the more your cost per mile is going down. And so that's sort of the two-step general process that we take. For vehicle miles traveled, what we've been using is the National Household Transportation Survey, this isn't exact, but they do it once about every 8 years.
Right.
It was done in 2009. The most recent one we have is 2017. I've been talking with FHWA who does this particular survey, and they're going to be changing sort of how periodically they do it. They're going to be doing this survey every 2 years going forward, starting with 2024.
It's much more useful.
Well, we're going to wade into some continuing issues that we may have with it going forward, along with some possible solutions, both with that product or maybe with another one. And like I said, we use the IRS and AAA driving costs to get at that mileage rate per mile based on how much you're driving. So starting with the mileage rate, which this is one that we're starting with the mileage rate. So we start at the assumption that at the base, people are driving about 10,000 miles. You'll see in that slide coming up which households that more so applies to. But
Is that Vermonters or just generally in the United States?
So the IRS mileage rate is a national rate. And so it'll cover both costs of ownership and costs of operating. So on ownership side, it's your insurance, it's your maintenance, that'd be operating. It's your insurance and things like that. And then on the operating side,
Garaging or whatever. If you're renter, sometimes you have to pay for
lease payments, finance.
gas.
Gas would be under operating costs along with maintenance.
Okay.
And depreciation, things like that. So, you might say, well, we're using a national number that's not very Vermont specific. So yes, we are paying more on things like we probably have to buy more tires than some people in other states do. But on a whole, Vermont, kind of averages out in the end because we pay a lot less in car insurance than people in a lot of other states do. Just from personal experience, I can tell you when I moved from Massachusetts to here, my insurance payments went down to about a third of what they were before.
Well, that makes sense if you know Massachusetts drivers.
Well, in Massachusetts, a lot of people are uninsured because they can't afford it, which drives the rates up on everyone.
Right.
So yeah, this is sort of the This is the schedule that shows you how, as you drive more miles, starting with 10,000 up to 20, you'll see that that rate per mile is going down. So we start with the IRS and we use basically very rudimentary regression to get that slope, to get us to that lower amount per mile using the AAA data. So moving into the VMT, which is where some of the current problems are arising. The last report was written in 2017. It does, and why we use this and why it's been good in the past is that it presents the data for all of the family configurations, and we're able to pull out what we need for mileage based on, how many adults or how many kids are in the household. So that's something that that we're not aware of other data sources presenting it in that granular way. The problem is in the last 2017 survey, the response rate for Vermont was very low. And I'll show you in a table, and I think on the next slide, but you'll see that there are some configurations that didn't get any responses for our state. And you'll see that there's a wide variability in terms of what makes sense for some of the other configurations. So this year, what Dan did to account for the fact that that was not really perfect, he actually worked with Tom to come up with, so we took the Vermont total results, right? So that's putting all of the responses into one pool to sort of increase our sample size. So we start with that total amount, and then we look at what the results were nationally to see how does this differ nationally? What is the percent change nationally based on what your household configuration is? So I just actually spoke to those points, but so let's take a second to look at this table. So in that first column there on the left, the NHTS 2017 Vermont results, that shows you the average. So of the respondents, that shows you what their average response was for how much they're driving every year. So you see that for one adult where the youngest child is 0 to 5, there either weren't enough results to report anything or there were no results. So we don't have anything to go on for that family type, which is one of the 6 configurations that we use in the report. And further down, this isn't really something that we look at specifically for this report, but one adult retired, no children. There's a huge variance between that and what we're seeing nationally and, all the other types. So like I said, all the way at the bottom on that row that called all, so in that first column there, that 8,810, that's our starting point when we bucket everyone into the same group. And so then the next column over under the national results, that's what we use. So we take that one adult, no children, we take that 11,860 and see how that compares to the 10,927 that's at the bottom. So that under adjuster, that 1.09, that means that for that particular household, we should be multiplying our Vermont all by 1.09 to get our estimated Vermont results. So that's that last column on the right. So
last column on the right, and so for each category, this is what that.
Yeah. So each of those adjusters for corresponding to each of the family configurations, we're multiplying the Vermont all results by that adjuster to get to what we're estimating for that family configuration. And that's just an exercise we thought was appropriate based on the very low response rates to the survey conducted in that year.
I hate to ask the obvious, but how do people take this survey? I'd love somebody to survey me on the miles driven every year because it's driving of miles.
Yeah, so on the FHWA website, I think that they use 3 different approaches, one being mailings, one being calling people, and the third being internet responses. So it's, in terms of how you conduct surveys, that's an appropriate way to do it because you're not, if you only do internet surveys, you're likely going to be skewing to probably younger people who are spending a lot of their time online to begin with, and you'd be missing another demographic who's not spending as much time there. If you're just doing mailings, personally, if I don't really know where something's coming from, I often throw it out. So
Ask these people to.
so that's how they approach contacting people anyway.
Can you just explain this?
Sure.
Get that?
Sure. So, in that first column there, you see how there's pretty good variability between the responses and some have none. So what we do is all the way at the bottom in that row labeled all,
Yeah.
we lump them all into the same bucket. So our starting point for all is 8,810.
Right.
What we then do in the second column under the national results is we're taking that 11,860 and dividing it by that number at the bottom, 10,927. And that's our adjuster, that 1.09, which we then multiply, going back to the Vermont results, we then multiply that 8,810 to get our estimated Vermont results, which in that case is the 9,562, which they'd round more.
Gotcha.
It's a lot of digits.
That was a little complicated, but good.
It is probably one of, I mean, Nolan probably takes the cake for the most complicated calculations he has to do, but this is definitely one of the more complicated ones that we have to do.
But Dan invented this along with.
I believe, sorry.
This is urban?
Yeah, sorry. So this was just, there's one for rural.
Okay, I was gonna say, this seems so low.
There's also one for rural.
Just Burlington.
This is just the Chittenden County, yeah.
Okay.
Yes, sorry, this was just an illustrated, I could have put rural in. It would be just to show you the same step-by-step process.
Yeah.
So what we then have to do is combine take age-weighted averages for those households with kids, because there's two buckets they fall into on the other table. But in the end, we get to these numbers for the different configurations.
Right? Yes. You surveyed, but.
So this is where we then are able to multiply these vehicle miles traveled by those mileage rates that we were just looking at. So this is sort of the second step of the process here.
You know, on that why with the going from one adults to the 2+, it's the urban plus rural. Urban, it's more than double. Presumably there's just a bunch of more than twos in the two, but the urban is right about double.
Sorry, so the rural urban clusters, yeah, more than double. Yeah, I mean,
Are rural more likely to have 3, 4?
I don't know exactly what the reason for that is, but it could come down to just, how you access certain things in your life. So obviously you're probably going to double the amount of miles driven if you're talking about your commute. But there could be more variance if you need to do things like access healthcare and you live in a very remote area that takes you a while to get there, or you have to go farther to go grocery shopping.
Childcare.
Childcare could be another, yeah, just anything that you use your car for. It's just when you're in those rural areas, it could just be, again, further and further away, whereas opposed to you might have a childcare center down the street if you're living on.
That's what
Pearl
makes it so
Street.
surprising that one adult with one child is almost identical to one adult with no children.
It's actually a little lower.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, right, on the rural.
Yeah.
But the 2 adults with no children, sorry, it's childcare and all those factors
Yeah.
would be in there, but maybe it's 2 adults. I guess you're skewing the age, right? So you'd have people that may be more likely to be in an age that's driving more in a rural sector.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess just to back up for a second, again, we're working with survey results that were, not great for Vermont. We weren't able to use the granular family configuration Vermont specific mileage rates just because there weren't enough responses within our state. So it's not a perfect approach because of that. But, we're talking pros and cons. It is Vermont specific. So we are talking specifically about Vermont habits. But again, there's just this issue with low response rates, which we'll get into this in a couple of slides. There are ways to get more robust samples through the survey. And going forward, if you choose to stay with this, there will be at a cost, an opportunity to work with FHWA to create a more robust sample for Vermont.
Does the ACS ask us about miles? How many miles to work and stuff?
I don't think it asks about mileage, but there are questions it has about how many vehicles.
Work is from your home. I just remember answering that recently.
Yeah, I'll have to look into that a little bit more, but they definitely skew more towards asking about how many vehicles do you have? Do you own or lease your vehicles? It's much more sort of the demographic perspective than the usage perspective. They even ask you if you have a refrigerator or running water, that survey. So,
Can you tell us what INREX?
yes, I'm about to. Oh, what it stands for?
Yeah.
I'd have to go to their website. I was on it this morning, but I forget the exact. Yes. So in the past, VTrans has purchased this survey, which is why we've had access to it for their, I think that they use it for their roadway performance metrics. But in the past, I think in 2009, they may have paid for the more robust sample, but in 2017, they did not, which has sort of led to this issue that has arisen with the low sample size. Now, for their roadway performance, I was talking to them yesterday. They said that they've moved to a different program called INREX, which, sorry, I don't know the exact.
But it's a program.
It's a program that's used. I actually used it in a previous at a previous employer, and so it's going to be good for their uses. But the problem is it does not provide the same household configurations
Right.
that we need when we're talking about.
It's not as well coordinated or aligned with our work.
So the family configurations was just never really part of VTrans use case for the data. They used it in other ways. It was just available, so it was useful for this report because we do try and tease out those differences, right? So yeah, INREX does not provide the same household behavioral profiles to those configurations. So NHTS has already started the what's going to be the 2024 survey. So they've already started the work on updating the survey.
And they're now going to do it every 2 years.
And they're not going to start doing it every 2 years. The issue is it's going to be like the 2017 survey in terms of respondents because they've already started. So, I asked specifically about this. We've missed the window of when we'd be able to work with them to get what they call add-ons, which is really just a more robust sampling, a larger sample size.
So I missed that.
We'll miss 2024. And I'm going to talk to them next week on the phone. But for the 2026 survey, there is an opportunity there, at a cost. And they're going to tell me a little bit more about what that looks like, the cost wise, when we speak.
I would assume that would be useful for other committees and VTrans, AOT in some other capacity. We could share the cost depending on its cost.
Yeah, I'm not sure to what extent like a transportation committee does use this. But that could be a discussion that we have leading up to the
Pressure for us to, I think there are a lot of people interested in our moving registration of vehicle miles traveled. There's a lot of work towards vehicle miles traveled in our survey, I feel. And so it might well align with where we end up.
Yeah, and in a conversation I had with Dan earlier this week, something he posited was, there is this push now to work towards the climate goals that are written, into statute right now. And if
Right. And that's
this is a way to show that people are driving less per se, which seems to kind of be the case, but I can't say that authoritatively. It could just show us that, driving less may actually be a good driver of reducing your emissions. It's just a hypothetical potential use case. But, it's something to chew on if you are able to talk to some of your peers in the building. And just to show you what agencies typically go and use or go to NHTS to get those add-ons. These are from the last survey that they conducted. These were the agencies that got a bigger sample size for their area. And it shows you how big that new sample size was. So there's really just two types of people or entities that have gone and gotten these more robust surveys in the past. It's departments of transportation, which in our case, VTrans isn't planning on using this in the future, is what I was told. And then is it regional planning agencies and municipal planning offices are those four at the bottom? So every time they do this survey, they do have people come in and get this more robust sampling. And just to show you sort of the profile of what those agencies are. So we've kept sort of coming back to MIT every time, but so MIT uses the national CES data and then adjust for that much in a very similar way to how we adjust food. We look at the regional difference between the Northeast and nationally. They do a similar type adjustment when they're looking at transportation. So they start with the national numbers, which is where you get the tables that are specific to different household sizes. Once you go regional, they just do all consumer units. But then they take that and they compare that to how the Northeast compares nationally. So that's their approach for it. I don't know, when you go into these surveys, you have to decide which income bucket you're looking at to determine what costs you're going to use. So I don't know which bucket they use specifically, but, if we're looking at their numbers, which I think, no, I don't have that in the next slide. If we're looking at their numbers and we say, hey, this looks lower than what I would have expected, it could be that they're using a different income bucket that for our purposes, we might target a different income. Does that make sense? If we targeted a higher income, it's much more likely that it's going to be a higher expenditure that we're looking at. So it's something that's updated annually. So we always know that we'll have new data for it. But it's not, again, the underpinning data is not Vermont specific like the NHTS is. So we're kind of looking at two different things here. We're looking at being Vermont specific at a cost, and we won't have the data in time for the next report that we're writing. Or we're looking at something that's, not as Vermont specific that we then adjust to make more Vermont specific. But again, the underlying data is national.
Right.
So that's kind of the two, there's pros and cons to both of these approaches. From a process standpoint, I'll just tell you that using the consumer expenditure report would be simpler for our office. But if the thrust here is to be as specific to our state as possible, there's probably going to be a certain financial outlay that the state would have to make and make sure that we're working with NHTS in advance of the next surveys to make sure that we're getting them to update that and give us a more robust sample so the data is useful. Because as it currently is, it's not incredibly useful, although in theory it should be much more useful.
Right.
So it's just kind of, it's a hard place to be in, especially with the fact that they've already started the 24 survey and we're not
We
going
can't do that.
I specifically asked that they're currently closed to add-ons because they started in 2022 for the 24 survey. So they're already a year plus into this process for updating it.
Feel free to share the legislative list so that we can look at all this.
No. Yeah, so I think that's for that.
So those are big decision points, and we don't yet know what the additional costs would be.
I don't yet know what the additional cost would be. I mean, one thing that you could consider is making some kind of provisional decision where if this is, too expensive, then we go this way. If this is within reason and would be available, the money for it would be made available, then we go this route, But it's also something we could put a pin on. And when I have this conversation, I'm talking to him on Tuesday, I should have more clear information on what the cost would be at that point. But just for our purposes right now, what I have up now is what the consumer expenditure survey looks like for transportation. I have highlighted the 50 to 70,000 just because that's the bucket where sort of the official livable wage family configuration falls into. And so this is the national data that we would then convert to more Northeast region more specifically. And that's in that same similar type process that we looked at with food. So I really just wanted to show you this to show you what components are surveyed for in this survey. And it does include a lot of the same spending categories in the ownership category and in the ongoing operational cost category. So I guess I'll just pause there because I know I've said a lot of words.
Any thoughts? Yeah.
So I'm just curious from a methodological standpoint, when you're making some of these choices, for instance, which one of these? There was one where you were looking at the income was the telecommunications. We were thinking for incomes between 40 and 49,999. And then on this one, we got highlighted 50 to 69,999. And I'm just wondering from a methodological standpoint, does it matter if we're shifting between our assumptions between these different categories?
So that specific example is a good thing to bring up. So with things like telecommunications, so what you're paying for your cell phone, the providers are going to have a much more fixed menu of plans that you can select from. So it's easier to pick one income group and apply that to all because it is very much a much more fixed menu that they have. But something like transportation, Chris Roop, who does a lot of our transportation work in our office, actually sent me a US DOT, I forget if it was a paper or an article that they wrote, that there's a very close relation to as you have more income, you spend more on transportation. So there is some more variability too. Yeah. There is some more variability. And part of that can be you have, if you're very low income, you might have a Honda Civic, pretty good gas mileage, right? If you are very high income, you might have a Corvette or something that burns through premium gas.
Or you could actually afford a Tesla.
Or you could do that.
I mean, yeah.
Or you could get a second car. We lived in Brownsville with, as a 4-person household with one car for about 2 years.
Yeah. More and more Vermonters anyway are choosing to live with one car. Mecca has one car.
So this is one car though, right? Isn't it?
This is two, right, for two person?
For a two-person household.
Two persons.
One vehicle.
For their, no, it would be the average transportation spending by a two-person household, so.
Yeah, so the consumer expenditure survey, they don't start at the point of how many cars do you have? They start at the point of how much is your household spending? So within that, so this is gonna be a big pool of people. Within that, there's probably gonna be people with no 1 or 2 cars or 3 cars. If they've got a summer hot rod or something. This is looking at what the average spending within that group is. If that makes sense.
Is that the other reason for the income? I'm getting back to Alan's question about the methodological consistency. It's not inconsistent in the sense that because you're looking at a two-person unit, it makes sense for you to look at that higher income that's more representative of the two-person basic needs income, whereas the 40 to 49 was also inclusive of the single person.
Yeah, so like with that, I think so with telecommunications, it's more appropriate probably to look at that income range, that 40 to 49, because again, it's going to be, you're buying your own phone, you go to 2 people. It's not like there's a different spending pattern. If it's 2 people, it's like you're adding the second phone. So it's kind of, in that sense, it's more appropriate to treat that like 2 single people. And then we just split the costs of the internet because I don't need 2 subscriptions in one house. I don't know if Xfinity even does that.
Right.
So when you're using this in this report here, we don't care about children or anything. It's gonna be the same number
So
regardless.
we don't use this data for transportation as is, but what CES does do nationally, they have tables that are specific to a one-person household, two-person household, two or more, four-person household. So we would go and match them with their appropriate table, but then we'd come and do that adjustment to the Northeast for them.
But children have a big impact on amount you drive, particularly rurally. I mean, hopefully everybody uses the school bus, but for sports and after-school theater and music activities, people
Yeah.
tend to do quite a bit of driving if there isn't a school bus after. If
Well,
there's
that's where this comes in.
a late bus.
Which table is that?
That was on page 29, right, where you said how many miles they
Oh,
drive.
is that this one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
With kids versus no kids.
Yeah, so again, that's sort of the trade-off. You know, it is at the end of the day, always a trade-off. The trade-off is the more regular, consistently updated data that, you know, we know is, you know, it's, people use this survey for all kinds of analysis. It's kind of an authoritative source for a lot of endeavors, but with the other source, we can get it to be much more Vermont specific and not have to do these regional adjustments. It's really just a trade-off. And you know, neither is perfect for different reasons.
I'm guessing it's probably a data limitation. Well, I'm thinking of, like, this is the average cost, and we think about basic needs costs. I'm much thinking of the conversation we had on housing, right, for fair market rent. If they look at the 40th percentile, like you said, you don't want the first percentile if 10 or 15% of housing units are substandard or whatever it is, you want it to be north of that, and 40 is what's available. I mean, it's higher than basically, it's not having out those luxury, you know, people that are in a 2,500 square foot, you know, piece, whatever. For transportation, presumably it's some mix of necessary travel and luxury travel, or
Sure.
what would be non-essential travel, right? And I guess the question of that is, one, I'm guessing there's no easy surveys or anything out there that would be appropriate to make an
What are people using it for?
I mean, for an adjustment, right? I mean, if we want a basic needs budget, you're factoring in across the average use of travel, some proportion is not essential, some proportion is basic needs, does it? And if it's not to try to make it more complicated,
No.
this is the most accessible data point, but.
Yeah, I mean, and I think some of that might come back to, again, what you would end up using as your data, because, you know, like I said, VTrans would buy the NHTS, but they weren't necessarily using the household configurations to figure it out. But I do believe, and I will double check on this, that there are questions that they ask in the survey that relate to, are you traveling for this purpose, this purpose? And what I saw was that they, instead of giving you like average amounts, they'll say, I estimate I do 0 to 100 miles for this purpose per year. I do 100 to 500 miles for this purpose. So it's not perfect, but there is some limited information available for that, I believe.
Yeah, I think. Be interesting to see what's there.
So decision points, I think we need more financial data before we make
Yep.
too many decisions.
I was anticipating probably that this is something we would probably put a pin in for now until I get that further level of detail on it for you,
Is that okay with everybody? Yep.
because I imagine you might have a little consternation if it's $100,000, $200,000 for the survey data, but if it's
Well,
5,000, that might be a different
Exactly.
question.
exactly, but I also think if it's a certain amount more, we would want partners to be interested in it. as
Absolutely.
well.
Absolutely. And the fact that, so our next meeting won't be until the 20th, and that will give you an
Right.
opportunity, hopefully, to have some of those discussions.
Richie, do you have any thoughts on this? Are you okay with putting a pin in it and coming back to it?
I think we need to wait till its next meeting.
Yeah, okay. Great, let's move to clothing and household expenses.
So this last slide of transportation
Oh,
again.
sorry, I thought we were heading
We've
down.
kind of already talked about all this. I'm really just trying to highlight here that there are pros and cons to both of these approaches. And, that's really all. We've kind of talked about that already.
I do think, I mean, and I'm just saying, this is just me. I think we're hopefully going to end up with something that is more meaningful, and more meaningful means more robust Vermont specific data. So if we want, if the drive is to make it more useful, the drive is to make it more robust and specific to Vermont.
Yeah, so the one thing I will say, and this is obviously, I'm not here to advocate in any direction. For the 24 survey, we'll be in a similar situation with where we're at right now with the 2017 survey. It won't be, if we do get that more robust sample, it won't be until so next report, we'll have the same issues. The report after that, potentially, if we went that route.
By our decisions.
Yeah. If you weren't to switch to CES for this next one. So,
Okay,
yeah.
great. Ready to move on? Because I'm cognizant we're losing Elizabeth at 4, and I think we're losing Richie at 4.
You are,
So,
Is that right?
that's correct.
And we're losing Elizabeth at 4:20.
so this next section will be quick. It's another relatively simple one. And then we had discussed maybe pushing childcare to the meeting on the 20th.
Yeah.
Which that one is going to have a sort of simple explanation, but it's going to have some big questions for you to talk about.
Yeah.
So for this report, we're using the consumer expenditure survey by the consumer unit and income, and that's all before taxes, to estimate what people are spending on clothing and household expenses. So these tables, like we've talked about, they're reported by family size. If you go to those different tables, and we have the option of looking at the different income buckets. So that allows us to target each of these different configurations that are in this report. And so what we pull from the survey are specifically clothing and apparel. We pull, it's the households. I think I have the next slide. Anyway, there's one bucket under household operations so there's a line item for like large appliances and miscellaneous equipment. Because we're assuming people are renting, they're not going to be going and buying a fridge. So we remove those expenses from that household spending category when we're looking at it. And then again, yeah, stuff like that. So stuff that typically your landlord is going to be responsible for. Well, if they're a good one. So this table here is really just, and this will be the same when we look at the tables for each household configuration for the other categories that we use this survey for. These are just the table numbers that are used. So you'll see for the single, we're using that table 3404, which is specifically for a one-person household. Single, one child, 3414, which is a 2 people or more. It's just it's a little different than when we get to the 4-person tables, because there's no in-between table that's offered. But it's specifically, if you have a 4-person household, you're going to be going to the 4-person tables. So that's the 3414. And then for 2 adults, no children, which is our official livable wage configuration, that's 3424, which is 2 people, specifically 2 people. And then the last table is specifically for 4 people. And within each of these, we do go and target the specific income buckets that people are falling in. Because unlike telecommunications, you're going to have different levels of spending based on income on, what clothes you buy, whether you're going to Walmart or you're buying, I don't know, Louis Vuitton off the internet or something.
Or going to your local flags
Yeah.
and getting it for a lot less.
Right.
Okay.
So in this report, we don't assume that there's any difference between urban and rural spending, because really, why would there be? The pledge you buy is going to be the same in pretty much every part of the state. But This table just shows you how each of those family configurations differ. And this is also in the report, which you all, I hope, have still. So. Yeah, so the livable wage is based on that 2-adult household, and part of where this particular category may come into consideration, again, relates back to this conversation we started this all off on, which had to do with the roommates. Because there will be some differences in assumed cost sharing.
Couldn't it be, yes, they may cost share, but couldn't it be twice what a single person living alone would be?
You could take that approach.
Because if you think about household expenses in the strictly consumer sense, they may share the expense, but they also may have double the use, right? Except for like furniture polish, and that kind of stuff, but, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I guess I'm going back to like my just out of college days when I was sharing with roommates. You buy a box of like Lysol wipes. You don't want your roommates to just use them all up. So those are like yours and they might get their own. If you operate at different rates.
Or you buy a box and then your roommate gets the next one.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's lot.
Coordination.
It probably comes down to how good of friends are you with your roommate?
Yes, yeah.
So this is per month, right?
Yeah.
Or is this can't possibly be per year.
This is per month.
Okay.
No, I spend, pair of jeans now, I'll spend, if it's $155, I'll spend 100 of that on a pair of jeans and there's 2/3 of my budget for the year, right?
Right. Right. That's why. Wait, yeah. Anyway.
It's monthly.
Great.
Yeah, so just this slide is really just to say, if you were to make that change or to think about adding that configuration, we'd have to think about, and this could be something that our office works on. We would end up having to think about what the economies are in terms of how much we're assuming they're sharing expenses in this area. It's probably going to be some overlap. It probably won't be purely like adding two singles together, but it might be close to your point. It might be close.
Yeah, I mean, if it's not a big differential,
I don't think
it's just not worth.
But
But it kind of is, like when you look, at least based on this, going from the single no children to adults no children, right? That's only up 50%, not
yeah, it's
100%, right? I mean,
it's up $90
$90
per month, which over the course of the year could.
5 cents of wage. Even less.
But over the course of, the year, it adds up to, I don't know, it could be $1,000 difference.
Yeah,
Which,
but even proportionate, more just that question about, right, whether it's doubling it on that, not thinking, like I might have expected to be closer to double too.
But I still think like if you're looking at how the clothing piece, obviously, people are sharing clothing, but for things like dishwashing, a single person's gonna buy the same amount that a double person does. But they're gonna use the same amount when they're doing dishes for two versus dishes for one, right? So like you are gonna have less. You're not gonna share, you're gonna have double the toilet paper, I would assume, right? But you're not necessarily gonna have double the, Windex and double the this and that, which could be that differential. If that's what household expenses, if that's what we're talking about, like, we also need to get vacuum bags, right? We need to do that kind of thing, you're not double.
Right.
yes.
And if you factor in too, the economy of scale, like if you're buying the 30 pack of toilet paper versus if you're living alone, maybe you're buying the 6-pack, which costs half as much as the 30 pack.
I think that's also, I know I brought it up in our first meeting, the age of the child. And the fact that really the ages that we have looked at are not diaper wearing ages. And as someone who just blew $60 on one box that I know won't last 2 weeks between home and daycare. This is not realistic in my mind, as someone who is currently living that.
And it may not be realistic for older kids with clothing.
Oh,
Right.
my
I
gosh.
was just gonna say that.
Yeah, I mean, older kids in clothing, I think that's a wash with the diapers. I mean, it's like, I bring on diapers any day compared to, some of the older kids' clothing costs.
Right, and maybe a 2-year-old in diapers costs the same as a 17-year-old boy who's playing soccer and has sports equipment.
Yeah, that's
That kind of
what I
stuff
mean.
eats lots of food, and so maybe maybe we do need to think about the ages.
I think the ages with food and with these line items are come into play.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, part of the reason why ages 4 and 6 were chosen, it had to do also with the times, because back in the mid and late 90s, there was the whole push to get people who were on welfare into work. And a lot of the folks that were on welfare were folks that had small children. So then the question was, well, what do they need to earn so that they're not also on public assistance, right? So there was a logic flow to why 4 and 6 were chosen. And I think the question for us, one of the questions for us in the way the report is laid out and written is, is there any additional commentary that could help the reader just understand, like, oh, right, you might have kids that need diapers, or you might have a 17-year-old with size 11 shoes. Like there's these differentials.
Yeah.
But that within some percentage point, you can be assured that this is pretty close to what is for all the diversity of what it could be, right? Because we're never going to get something that matches everybody's individual circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, the lowest age child that we're assuming is 4 years old, which they're probably not on. Let's
hope not.
Does that break down age when we're looking at the CES survey?
No.
Right, so that's just in general.
So, yes, right. It comes into play more so in like the childcare category or the food category.
Okay, let's keep going because we're losing Richie in 7 minutes.
We're actually at the point where we are at childcare. So if you would like to this to the next meeting, that would be.
Well, should we briefly just touch on childcare and some of the challenges as we think about it?
Sure.
Let's do that and get it sort of teed up.
Yeah, so this section also isn't super long. It's a relatively straightforward calculation. Like I said, at the very end, there's going to be a big question for you all to think about. And actually, maybe it's useful that you would have until the next meeting to sort of mull that over in your mind. So for childcare, we get from AHS and specifically DCF, they do ongoing market surveys in each county. They look at both licensed care centers and was it registered home care?
Registered home care.
Registered home care. So we get a figure for each county in Vermont that tells us what the average childcare cost is by the different type of center that people are using. So what we do is we go and we average those two together. And this isn't perfect. It isn't true in every county, but typically in urban counties or the urban county, people are going to be more likely to be putting their kid in a licensed center. And on average, not necessarily true everywhere, they'll be more likely to be using a registered home care option in rural areas. So
That's a big assumption that's not carried out in my neck of the woods, but that's okay.
as I said, it's not going to be true in every county, but when Joyce has looked at these differences, that tends to be the case. It's not a hard rule. So yeah, Chittenden County is used for the urban figure, and then we, again, like everything else, average the other counties to get to the rural. So they both are those blended averages of the home and center care. So coming back to some of the assumptions, so 4 years old and 4 years old for the younger child, 6 for the older child. That matters in how many hours of care we have to assume. So for the younger child, we're assuming full-time care for 52 weeks. And then for the older, because they have school It's 15 weeks of full-time care, and then the remainder is part-time care while they're in school.
Yeah, I mean, our own pre-K, public pre-K kind of puts a dent in this, which is 4 years old. I would, quite honestly, going forward for childcare, it would make sense to have it more like a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old until we have hopefully someday public pre-K for all 3 and 4-year-olds. Which would be great. I think this is a little old now, given how many kids and how many towns have full day pre-K for 4-year-olds. I mean,
5
a
days,
lot of towns in my neck of the woods.
5 days a week.
Yeah. Woodstock offers full day pre-K.
We don't have any childcare, so.
You have public pre-K for 10 hours a week.
No, we don't. In
In-
Brownsville?
Albert Bridge doesn't offer that. Where do they go to get it?
We
That is a public option, but they don't offer it. Anyway,
we can't get anybody to come to Brownsville to
teach it.
teach it.
Got it. You could combine with Reading to do it.
They probably
Just saying.
But another time. Yeah, we couldn't, but we have, some of us send our kids to Reading to do it. I sent both of my boys to Reading.
Yeah.
Okay. So
So anyway, I think 4 years may, just given where we're going with some of this, that's something for us to look at.
Yeah, and-
That age may be too high.
I think maybe that's a good thing to, because we're going to talk about this more in the fourth meeting as well. So we can maybe spend some time mulling that over. But yeah, so just the other assumptions. So in the 2-adult household with children where there is only one wage earner, the assumption is just that the partner who's not working is providing the childcare. It's the assumption used in the report.
That is an old assumption.
So where the things that you probably need to start thinking about in addition to what's been raised already is that prior to Act 76, none of these families would have qualified for childcare subsidies. Their income is too high under the old rules.
Under the new rules.
So yeah, previously none of these were eligible, but now, and there's a stepwise process for this, but starting October 1 of 2024, these families will all be eligible up. So it's up to 575% of the FPL. They will all be eligible for the subsidies that are available. And this here just shows you like how high the subsidies go to, up to 575%. So they break down FPL by number of people in the household. So those figures are based on the different configurations that the federal government posts. So yeah, all these households are comfortably within the range and that they're going to qualify. The thing is, typically we do not include government assistance when calculating these budgets. But I guess sort of philosophically, the question becomes, do we consider this a public good or do we consider this more sort of welfare oriented?
That is a big
The
question.
reason to think about that and probably something to mull over is it matters a lot for when we go to write this next report and we have to calculate these childcare costs for these households. Because if
On a
we're,
tax credit,
it's through CCFAP, the subsidies, and
subsidy.
It's a subsidy.
So
your
the point of sale, they pay X number of dollars for childcare. I mean, I'm wondering if it could be put somewhere in well, it's not a tax credit though.
it's
The payment to the childcare provider.
Then maybe just adjust the price of the childcare based on the subsidy. And say that's the cost of childcare. Don't put it in as a subsidy. You just say the vast majority of people are 75%. And so if you're way over that, you don't need to worry about whether or not you're meeting your basic needs.
And what'll be helpful for you, I think, is Joyce has already started working on what it will look like. Joyce Manchester is our in-house economist, what it will look like.
We heard from her the first.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. She's already started looking into what it will look like in terms of how much they'll be receiving based on what we're estimating this like family profile will be spending on childcare. So we'll be able to look at it sort of both ways after she looked into that.
But we would still maintain in the tax calculations the tax child credit and the dependent care credit because those are federal?
Those are both state credits.
There's two. There's.
The federal one, I believe, has been discontinued for this point, the child tax credit.
The earned income tax credit.
None of these families make little enough to qualify for that either. All these incomes are above the income threshold to qualify for the EITC.
For EITC, but they get the child tax credit.
Yeah, because the state one goes up to, you get the full credit up to $125,000. And then it gets phased out up to $175,000.
And then there's a dependent care credit for some of the households as well.
Yeah, just the ones with children, I believe.
I think what will be important in the report text would be to explain the differences between sort of what's above the line, i.e. the actual out-of-pocket cash expenses, and then below the line, which is various public policies that have been made around credits and certain types of support that are, some of which are federal, some of which are state. So that because you're gonna have you got the childcare line above the line and childcare credit below the line, and sort of like, it can be confusing to the reader, I would think.
Well, they may not get a good child care credit anymore after this anyway, because they, federal, a child independent care credit for daycare, they may not get anything federal because they're already getting such a subsidy.
Reduce things in that area.
So they'll,
So, of course, this brings up the question, which is the purpose of this basic needs calculation, is to identify a minimum amount you need to earn to not be on public assistance, to stand on your own 2 feet. And, I think that in and of itself is a discussion to have, because to be financially independent of public assistance it would be a goal of, I think, many of ours. And it would be fabulous, but it is, as we all know, sort of been insidiously interwoven into the cliffs that people are always concerned about. And this, one of the people that was talking about using this is everybody wants to know how much they can earn, and they don't want to earn anymore because they don't want to lose their LIHEAP, or they don't want to lose this. Well, at a certain point, we want people to be able to be earning enough to not be on all those programs.
right.
I mean, we want people to be earning enough to be independent. And so this is some of the tension that I think we feel in this work that we're doing, and in the work, as we go forward. And how we frame it is, as you said earlier, going to be very important. But, this goes to our minimum wage discussion. I mean, the minimum of, Franklin Roosevelt, minimum amount you need to live on, and live on is not being subsidized by the state purse.
But I think the other philosophical question that goes even beyond this is this question of public good.
Yes.
And what,
That too.
as a society, do we want to say are those core needs and rights, so to speak, that we collectively as a society say everybody should have access to, regardless of income, where they come from, generational wealth, all those kinds of things. And so we agree as a community to tax ourselves in a way that provides for
everyone to have the
everyone to
same.
have this base of whatever that is.
So that is slightly different though. That means that is a good that everyone has access to, no matter what their income is.
Correct.
Like public education. Everyone has access to that, no
Correct.
matter what your income is. Health in 2 areas that are substantial income is taken into play in healthcare, in childcare, and in housing. 3 areas. And
Right, but the,
so you would have to provide it for everyone, no matter what their income was, for it to be a complete public good, I would argue.
right, but I guess I'm going up even a higher elevation. It's a more just general philosophical question about how we organize society and what we choose to pay for collectively versus what we say an individual has to pay for on their own. You're on your own.
Right, but we haven't
We're not
established
solving that. Right, we're not solving that here. I'm just saying, like, it does go into this mix of what gets counted in the budget or not.
Exactly.
Right, because, as somebody that didn't have kids, I am paying for everybody else's children to go to get their education for 16 years and now childcare.
And just like everyone paid for you to go to
Exactly,
school.
right, because that's a public good that as a society, we said we value, right? And so it's not to be solved in this, but it does raise these larger questions that do eke into this bit.
Yeah, I guess from that philosophical perspective too, I mean, with the healthcare and with the childcare, they seem to be set at the level of the idea that everybody should be contributing toward their own somewhat akin to their ability to pay for it. So the goal isn't to get people off of it because they're both set so high that even somebody at the top 10% income earners in Vermont would still be getting subsidies when they buy their insurance on the exchange, and they'd still be getting childcare subsidies. But so it seems like that's different than that way. But philosophically, I think Ellen's point is that they're paying more, but maybe not everybody, because at some point your income is high enough that you can pay that full amount. Not to say any way is right and wrong, but at least for this analysis of that distinction between public assistance, I don't think either of those policies are set up with the goal of most people ever getting beyond that point.
And a single mother is not going to make $85,000 a year in Vermont. She's just not.
Some do.
Some do, but the ones we're talking about that require public assistance, right? They are on public assistance like food stamps and things that are a lot of these federal benefits that have income requirements, and then the benefits cliff is related to federal that we have no control over, in terms of how do you prevent. I mean, and it is real what you're saying is that a lot of people who work for, like, say, the hospital, they don't want that raise because that's a raise of $1 an hour is gonna lose them $250 in food stamps. And it just doesn't, or more than that. It doesn't pay for itself. It drastically impacts them.
So how,
Negative.
Liz, do we address that? How do we get this to pay for itself? And
No, I know.
so that people would be saying, yes, I want to earn more. I want to earn because I will earn enough to make up that difference.
Yeah. Well, I think so I know, for example, Green Mountain United Way and their Working Bridges program is, working exactly on this issue, right? Which is, they use a, benefits cliff calculator, right? So that an employer can actually sit down with the employee and say, how much, if we give you this raise, put that number in, it basically says this is how it's going to impact all of your benefits. And some people say that's okay, right? Because this gives me an opportunity to make more money down the road, because if I get this promotion, I'll get that promotion. But sometimes the single mom just can't, her kids are 4 years old. She's not in that position until maybe her kids are 16 and gonna be out of the house soon. And then maybe she can make that. So it is a really hard, and I know that, like, Green Mountain United Way is looking at ways to how can we give them something that helps them, like, is it extra food? Is it something that it's not going to affect their,
It's a non-cash.
yeah, like sort of a non-cash thing so that we can help them.
and they can get that raise, right? And then they get more food, they may get less food stamps, but we're giving them food through this program or whatever.
Just a question, why isn't healthcare on here?
It is.
No, and it was at a
Oh,
different.
Okay.
Wait, we had no one for,
Yeah, right. Sorry.
oh, it's okay. It was,
So next time,
Yes.
what are we doing?
Okay, so.
so we're going to dive further into childcare.
Yes, we'll have a little bit more information on childcare. I will be able to provide you with some updates on what I learned about the transportation data. So something that I have spoken with the chair about to maybe try and be most efficient with this committee's time, because time is running a little bit short. There are some smaller components that we still have not covered that our office is comfortable with how they're done still. And so we're thinking that either end of this week, sometime early next week, we'll provide you all with a memo outlining sort of generally what the process for calculating that component is and just why we feel comfortable with it. So that, and we'll give you plenty of time, at least a week to have that memo. It'll be 1.5 pages, maybe 2 pages, to look at it, think if you have any questions. And when we come back, instead of sort of greenfield presenting on all these topics, you'll be able to ask questions. So I think that that's something to help with your time. A couple of things that you could think about, because we'll talk about childcare and transportation. I don't think that will take up the entire time that we have allotted. So if there's anyone that you want to hear from, maybe on childcare, to talk about any of these questions, we certainly can invite some people who aren't me.
So we could have Ally Richards or one of our ledge council people on childcare, because if we're going to make a decision about having a single livable wage that we're going to be saying, rather than a rural and urban one, if there's a single Vermont one, we need to hear, I think, in more depth, particularly on transportation and to some extent, the 3 areas that are, I think, most impacted are housing, transportation, and childcare, or at least implied by childcare, because some of our experience is different. I mean, we have big childcare centers in rural Vermont. So, parent-child centers that are really like the Chelsea one I'm thinking of. It's fabulous across a large area. And I think that who would we want to have to help us get to that decision about recommending one or not. And so people who could be able, maybe somebody from the Vermont Center on Rural Development, who are the experts that could help us hone and understand those? Who would you recommend?
Could I ask a question? Is this specifically when thinking about the idea of having a separate urban and rural figure?
That's a piece of it.
Yeah, I mean, on that point, I can talk to Tom and see if he has thoughts, because he does have a good background in sort of, what's available and what makes sense to sort of differentiate there. So I can talk to him.
That would be
I
great.
can't promise I'll have strong thoughts on it,
Right.
but if he does,
He'll have thoughts. He'll have thoughts.
I know he always does.
So I guess, so we could ask Tom to give us his thoughts on this. We could talk to one person in each of those 3 areas, housing, childcare, and transportation maybe, and see what their feeling is, unless you don't think that's a good idea. I mean, how do we help us make a decision about that? Because that's, I think, one of the big things in the.
So looking big picture, I think the goal probably needs to be to have all of the decisions made by the end of the next meeting, so that on the 5th meeting, which is your last, and the day before the report is due, we can then present you with the report.
Report. It is possible for the report to be a day or 2 late. I mean,
But you all, I can double check with the lawyers, but you all need to be here to adopt it.
What I find very helpful before the next meeting, if possible, is to have the list of side by side of what it has been and what the decisions we've been making along the way.
Yeah.
So we've got
Because we have been.
I was gonna do that anyway.
Yeah, because in my mind, that also weighs in on this question of whether we average the urban and rural, or or we keep it the same as we have been.
Sure.
Because it's gonna radically reduce the wage numbers to do the averaging of rural and urban, given people's gut sense of things increasing so much and upward pressures on wages. Then that may be the answer. Like, we don't go there because, like, we want this to be defensible. We want this to be believable. We want this to reflect, generally gut sense. People are like, yeah, that basically makes sense. Right? So I think seeing things like in totality be easier for us to then come to some of these conclusions on some of these stickier ones.
And it's just to this point, I will just throw out that we're not going to be able to recreate this for all family configurations, the time constraints and resources we have. That's in a sense kind of recreating the entire report. So we'll be able to do it certainly for the official one, maybe another one that we're most interested in, but there's certain things like if we were to switch to roommates, we don't have time to come up with all the assumptions.
Right.
What that'll look like.
So we-
Right. No. I wasn't assuming that you were going to be calculating anything.
Okay. I'm just trying to figure.
Just like, it has been this, we're keeping it the same. It has been this, we're suggesting this. But we don't know yet.
Yeah.
Here are our options.
Right. And I think the components are different from the categories. So I think there are a lot of questions on the categories, but not on the,
The assumptions, you mean?
right.
Yeah, okay.
Well, or the our
We
categories.
still have to decide on which family configuration.
That's what I mean.
Right.
Categories.
Right? We still have to decide on rural and or urban.
Right.
We still have to decide on the other components, the childcare and the transportation housing,
Yeah.
right?
Housing.
And, right. What else? I mean, that's what I'm looking for.
That's
Like,
it.
what
Categories,
so we
components.
can be really efficient next time, but like, okay, we have to make decisions on these things.
Yeah, so I would just make sure you budget a healthy portion of the time for discussion.
So. Right. Elizabeth, you have to go. So what are your parting thoughts?
Well, they're actually logistical thoughts. I've had a series of deaths in my family in the last month, and I've had to go out of town almost every weekend for funerals. The last one is on the, I have to be in transit the afternoon of the 20th. So I would like to ask for a dispensation to be able to be online, to be able to attend the next meeting online so I could be present for the whole thing. If not, I could come in person, but I'll have to leave quite early.
I think, why couldn't you be online?
Because I think you're only allowed one, right?
For this public and legislator, there's not a limit.
We have no limit on this one. We're a special committee
Yeah.
because we have, thank having Sean, Ellen, and Liz.
Okay.
Well, great. Yeah, you're fine. Okay, where are you having to go?
That weekend, I have to go down to Tucson.
Oh, my God.
And there aren't that many flights.
No, it's okay. We're having to go to
I
Phoenix.
just couldn't work it out.
Had so many deaths. Sorry about that.
So
And thanks.
it's hard, but yeah. Anyway,
Can we just can we make sure that Doug is just considered a guest, that we could make sure that in case he wants to weigh in throughout the discussion that.
absolutely. We can source, we
I'll
can have
to the
to,
invites.
Thank you.
you send him when we're the next two meetings and send him the invites, see if he's able to make those. But yeah, I mean, I have hopes that we will that we will shed at least one, if not two categories, i.e. the single with one child, single, two, all that. I'm hoping we will simplify this to make it more palatable for you guys to continue to do it. And I would also hope that some of our decisions on the components that we've been discussing for the last 2 meetings would help make it slightly simpler.
I will just put out, it is the goal of our office to improve the methodology, not necessarily just to simplify.
Right. That's clear. Hopefully those decisions will improve.
Yeah, and I also think, we'll have time for this later after we've made our decisions and are done with our session, but I do think that there is some improvements that we've talked about.
Yeah, we
The
have.
way that the report is just laid out and the flow of it from a usability, a user experience that we could think about in time for the next report, but we don't have to do that right away, but.
Well, I think that's one of the things we are, how is this being used if it's being used? How, that's those are some of the questions we started with. And how can we make it more useful? The calculator, being able to make it active as a calculator would be very useful.
I don't know.
I will just throw out,
I don't know, if Green Mountain Way or whatever
That's a little
Liz
thing.
is developing a calculator, surely we can.
Well, no, the calculator already exists. This isn't like the calculator exists on a national level. And then,
Put in numbers and come out with.
yeah, and it comes out, yeah. It's like, Federal Reserve Bank, I think of Atlanta is who has it.
It's a rough estimate.
because we have a little longer period between this meeting and the next one, I would just throw out, if you have ideas that you want to think about more or talk about, feel free to get in touch with me. And we can sort of think about what that means.
Right. Right.
One, to that point, Erin was not able to be here today.
Yes.
And given that she represents a whole group, a community of HR professionals, I just wonder if there's anything that she additionally has to offer just in terms of how we think about all this, because we haven't really heard from her a lot. And I think,
It would be great to actually have her weigh in and let us know how we could make it more useful. I mean,
to the HR professionals, yeah, like how could this report be set up in a way and a flow and a usability so that she could then, if she was disseminating that to all the SHRM members, that they could actually use it. In what format would make that more usable, user-friendly, for instance? Because we do want this to be used. I mean,
maybe we could
otherwise-
ask her to send that out on the HR listserv or whatever exists for HR people to weigh in before the next meeting.
Yeah, so there's a chapter of Shuram in Vermont. So I'm sure we can disseminate the information that way.
You're also HR?
Yeah, so that I'm not here.
That's right. Right.
And I think just from my experience is most employers won't use this because they don't know it's a tool for them to use. And I think that's something we really need to be cognizant of. It's not just how do we make it more user friendly, but how do we let employers know?
So how do we market it?
Exactly. It's how do we make that campaign?
Right, so maybe
Who does that?
beginning with a question out on that listserv.
Yeah.
Maybe we could work on a question to ask in the next couple weeks before our next meeting so that we can get an answer. A couple answers anyway.
But it's never gonna be AFO's job to do like a press release and push it out and send it to everybody. So there is a little bit of sort of who would be tasked with getting that around? Like, how would that actually be facilitated? Because you're absolutely right. We need to have a more concerted effort to get it out.
This is one of the challenges we face in the legislatures. We have no staff.
Right.
So back to our other challenge. We could figure that out. We can figure that out.
Absolutely.
But I would suggest that Patrick, you and Ashley and Aaron, and maybe with some input with Ellen in terms of the question that we asked, if we get a question out on the HR listserv and, or whatever it's called, and get some answers back for the next, and maybe ask just a few questions, like maybe 2 or 3 questions.
Yeah.
And, that would be great.
Yeah.
That would be terrific. Very helpful.
Sorry, you said Ashley, Aaron, and
the two of you? Because Ellen, I think,
Ellen.
has some ideas
Okay.
on some of the questions. Or you could just email them both.
I'll be in touch to set up maybe a
And-
conversation.
Great. Liz, is there any value in tapping the Working Bridges folks in any way to sort of weigh in on anything at this late stage?
Yeah, I mean, this is the time for us to get people to,
We could potentially, I can talk with Tanya Kristen is the executive director. She knows I'm doing this and they're really, they support working families and helping, you know, and they're helping, they work for companies that have sort of lower income wage earners. And so they try to help people like navigate raises and
all the stuff we.
all the stuff that we're talking about, right? They are though, you know, about making sure that people have their needs met through benefits. So I'm not saying that they don't have a valuable place here. I think they do, but I think that the reality is we're talking about people who are making 16, 17 an hour, which isn't 35 that a person, single parent needs to make. And so, again, it's this, the purpose of this thing is this basic needs is to say, what do you need without benefits?
Would there be any value though in hearing from some of the employers that have invited the Working Bridges program in?
Like the
Just sort
hospital
of,
would be a really good
You
one.
know, just to say like, what are the, I don't even know, like, what are the challenges or like, why are you participating in this? Like, what are the values that you're working from?
I know the hospital in particular, CVMC, has this big problem of like people turning down jobs because they can't take a higher wage because of the loss in their benefits. I know it's a terrible thing because it slows them down for the rest of their career.
Yeah.
When they say no. But it's generally around
And it keeps them
single-parent
tied.
households.
It keeps them totally.
Yeah, it takes them time. And it's around single parent households because they don't have anyone else to rely on.
And, but the challenge, of course, is that that's really relates to the benefits cliff, which we're
Right.
not tackling.
Exactly.
So we'd have to frame the questions right if we were gonna ask them to weigh in so that it was really addressing what our charge is, which is the budget.
Right. Right, I guess, you know, we know that we know that this is a problem. That the benefits cliff is a problem, and that's, I think, a whole separate subject from the basic needs budget.
Yeah.
But actually, to me, it's totally involved. It's completely involved too.
Oh, I agree, because most people, I mean, that's the problem, that this goes back to, this is like a dream, you know, this is like a dream budget, right? It really is. It's not reality for most Vermonters. And so if we care about what is reality for most of Vermonters, people use this to say, okay, how is it that we can, you know, do something around on a state level that supports these families so that we can continue to have people in professional jobs and that they can support their families and get closer to this number, right? Maybe it's that there is there's no penalty for, you know, I mean, I don't know what it is, but it's, the problem is that this is for many Vermonters, not close to what they actually live.
But it's basic needs.
But it's
I mean, what
basic.
is really challenging here is we're not talking about the upper echelon.
Right.
Vermont. We're talking about a basic amount you have to earn to live in standing on your own 2 feet.
But the median wage in Vermont has gone up quite a lot in the last year, which is interesting.
The last 2 years.
And then I have a question for you. There's no scenario, I don't think, where earned income tax credit gets someone near the livable wage. I don't think there is.
Well,
Just get them out of poverty.
the cutoff for people who are, let's say, married with 2 kids, which should be the upper echelon. The income cutoff is right around like 50,000.
Yeah.
And the max credit
It's like 7 or something or 5.
Well, so the federal credit is going to be somewhere in the max credit for that particular household is going to be somewhere in the range of like $3,600. But that's, I mean, it phases in, you have a
Yeah.
plateau and then it phases out. So if you're at that 50, you're not going to.
That doesn't get you
Yeah.
the scenario it'd be.
But yeah, so, and even when you tack on the Vermont credit, which is 38%, it's another 1,000 or something like that. So it's still not going to get you.
All it does is put people out of poverty. They still get benefits. They still are in food stamps. They still have all these other.
It wouldn't.
They're eligible for.
Anything.
It doesn't throw them off anything and it doesn't get them closer to here. It just gets them above the poverty.
Yeah, so it's a lot of benefits programs are determined via AGI, and that tax credit is a post AGI, like, so that will never affect your eligibility for either federal or state assistance programs. It's sort of after the fact.
But from a public policy standpoint of societal values and what we collectively decide to support, the value of people not being in poverty, there's the reducing expenses, there's raising wages, and then there's providing benefits as the tools that you have, and increasing the state earned income tax credit from, it's 38 now, because it went from
8%.
25 to 32 in 1999 as part of that study. So it went up to 38%, like, but that is a tool, like the state could say, we're gonna do it at 75% or so. I mean, it doesn't get at the wage piece, but it does get at the larger income and getting out of poverty.
Right. Yeah, something, and it has to really probably happen on a federal level too, right? You cannot have it be where someone makes X number of dollars more an hour and their benefit decreases 3 times.
Right.
Right. I mean, you just can't, that just makes no sense. And it is a complete disincentive, which makes no sense on a federal level either. It's a waste of money.
On that happy note,
Thank you.
perhaps we should adjourn.
Thank you.
But there's lots of good follow-up here. This was good. Anything else before we end? Thanks. Saoirse, let's